Did you know Bermuda shares deep historical and cultural ties with the Caribbean, often overlooked in common narratives? Historically, colonial powers consistently included Bermuda as an integral part of the broader Caribbean region. Between 1616 and 1834, most enslaved individuals arrived in Bermuda from other Caribbean islands, a journey significantly shorter than from Africa. From the 1700s, Bermudians, both black and white, settled in Turks and Caicos, leading to most native islanders having Bermudian heritage. Similarly, Bermudians, both black and white, began inhabiting the Bahamas as early as 1648, establishing early connections. Post-emancipation, a mass migration of skilled workers from Jamaica and St. Kitts occurred to build Bermuda's dockyard extension. Ultimately, the majority of Bermudians, across all hues, possess direct and undeniable ties to the vibrant Caribbean.
And good morning and welcome to another episode of Territories Talk. Territories Talk was originally founded in 2018 with MPs from 3 different islands: Kenneth Bryan from the Cayman Islands, Akira Missick of Turks and Caicos Island, and myself, Chris Famous of Bermuda. We started a radio show that in 2021 migrated into an online show with Shayna Smith Archer of the beautiful Virgin Islands, Eden Hurlston of the Cayman Islands, and once again myself. We've now added Speaker Shirley Osborne of Montserrat. The purpose of Territories Talk is to educate persons about the smaller, often overlooked islands of Bermuda, the beautiful Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Montserrat, Turks and Caicos, and Anguilla, which constitute the Atlantic and Caribbean British Overseas Territories, which is a nice word for British colonies. Often in the media, unless there's a major disaster, the Caribbean doesn't get to the media, so we have to tell our own stories. So today we are going to be talking about Bermuda's historic connection to the Caribbean, because Bermuda is so far north, persons in the Caribbean forget that we're part of the Caribbean, and people in Bermuda forget that, or have been indoctrinated that we are not part of the Caribbean. So today I want to bring in someone I consider, well, he's my cousin, for full transparency, someone I consider a friend, a mentor, and someone who has an impeccable resume to tell the truth about Bermuda's historic context. And without further ado, I bring in the Honorable Walter H. Roban. Good evening. Good morning. I'm not sure which part of the world yet.
Good evening, good morning, good night.
Okay. Well, I see great light behind you,
Brother Chris. Happy to be here with Territories Talk once again.
So tell us, and for those who don't know, tell us, who is Walter H. Roban in 5 minutes or less, 5 seconds or less.
Walter H. Roban is a proud Bermudian with obviously somebody who was once a representative and leader of Bermuda. I retired from active politics earlier this year, but I'm also somebody who has, through my career, been very passionate about Bermuda's connections with the world, but also particularly with the Caribbean, of which I share ancestry with, but also do many Bermudians. So the Caribbean has always been a very much a topic of my attention and interest, academically, personally, culturally, and certainly as I see myself as living in an island that is part of the Caribbean family. So that's in a nutshell is Walter Roban, and I'm happy to be here to talk about those connections with your listening audience and yourself.
Yes, thank you for that. Yeah, it's important for us as people of the Caribbean, right, or Caribbean descent, whatever way they want to classify us, to tell our own stories, because for 400 plus years, people of non-Caribbean descent, let's just be frank, European descent, have been attempting to define who we are to us, right? They're trying to tell us, oh, they had no issue bringing people from the Caribbean to work their plantations and build their houses and sail their ships. But then they tell us, our ancestors, well, you're not part of the Caribbean. You should have nothing to do with those people, and those people are backwards. Meanwhile, they themselves are going down there and investing tons of money into the Caribbean, and we will talk about some of the investments as we go along today. But it's hypocritical, and we can't expect the hunter to tell the story about the lions. The lions have to tell their own stories, and this is where we are today. And I just want to give a shout out to my our media partners, Cayman Mall Road in Cayman Islands, Cayman Mall TV in Cayman Islands, CBN Radio and TV in the Virgin Islands, uh, Channel 82 here in Bermuda, and Radio Turks and Caicos Island in Turks and Caicos Island, right? So it's as important as telling our own story is getting our story out there, because through these media partners, we're able to not just tell Bermuda's story, but the story of the entire Caribbean to other islands. Because the other thing is that the slave masters used to use divide and conquer and try to tell us that this island's better than that island, then they'll go to that island and say the same thing and cause division amongst us, right? So we have to tell our own stories amongst ourselves. So yes, that's where we're at today, sir.
Well, I think that's a very good sort of explanation of very much has been a situation for many, many years. But there are some facts that I think people just need to embrace. And, one gets to a point in their life where you're just being straight up. You may want at points to be diplomatic, but they're just some facts. One is Bermuda is a part of the Caribbean family. And that connection does not just stand with one sociological group, one racial group in Bermuda. That connection is a part of every strata of Bermuda's society, from those who were descendants of the original European settlers or English settlers in the 1600s, and ongoing populations that have come to Bermuda as settlement. That connection stems through every strata of Bermuda society up to this very day. And also, the Caribbean has also been a great place of opportunity for Bermuda, and vice versa. Caribbean has connected the islands that we are part of, have been a part of our ongoing journey as a country, because there were opportunities here and Bermudians found opportunities there. So there has been an ongoing connection since the beginning of settlement between the people of Bermuda and our family islands to the south, particularly the British West Indies. So you want to call them that, the former British West Indies, now those islands that are a part of the CARICOM family and others, but in principally those islands. So those are facts, and people can talk how they want about it, but the facts don't lie. You should not, you may have an opinion, but the facts should not be disputed. And those are the facts.
All right, so let's go to a map, because what happens sometimes, people don't believe us melanated people unless it's in a map or something, right? So what we have here, I have no cursor on the screen, but what we have here is showing the route that enslaved persons were taken from Africa to the Americas. So you got some that went down to Brazil, some that went directly to the Caribbean, some that went to America. What people don't know is that the majority of enslaved persons out of Africa didn't go to America. The majority went to the Caribbean and South America. So if you go to places such as Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, especially Ecuador. Even you'll find large populations of black persons in Brazil. Half the population there is black, direct, like black like me, and then you have mixed people, right? But they have black. They would have black genealogy, and also into the Caribbean. So people have this concept that the majority of enslaved persons went to America. No, the America only got maybe 400,000 enslaved persons. The rest of the Americas got over 20 million. So with that being said, using geography, if we can't really see on the map here, but Bermuda is somewhere in the middle here, and the shortest route from Bermuda to the Caribbean is a direct line down south. So when the slave masters needed slaves, they didn't sail all the way back to Africa. They sailed down to the Caribbean, took goods from Bermuda, and then brought back enslaved persons from other Caribbean islands. These are historic facts written by, we'll get into it later, but these are historic facts written by one Cyril Packwood, someone who has no one can question his authority. His past, no, but no one could question his authority. He was a head librarian in Bermuda. He did multiple researches on Bermuda's history. He wrote a book called Chained on the Rock. So this is what we know. Anything you want to add, Honorable Roban?
Yes, couple points. The map that you have put up for everybody to see is a description of the route, as you said, of what was the slave passage, the Middle Passage from Africa into the Americas. And as you said, you're correct. The significant majority of slaves that were captured from Africa were deposited into South America and the Caribbean. The United States, so we can separate North America from the Southern and Central America pieces, did not get the lion's share, even though one might, because of media and even certain types of versions of stories, you might think that's the case, and even because of the significant influence the United States has had on Bermuda, particularly in the 20th century, you would be perhaps led to believe that. And even when you discuss sort of African American history, you get that impression. But the reality is that most of those Africans went into the Caribbean and South America. And as you talked about Brazil has the largest African population outside of the continent of Africa. The one country, it is the largest African population outside of the continent.
Approximately how many would you say Africans or descendants of Africa are in Brazil?
Yeah. Well, when you look at it from the outside and the different permutations of people of ethnic groups, and in Brazil, they separate people out in a different way than we do in our part of the world. Certainly the majority, if they're like plus 200 million people population of Brazil, which includes the variety of ethnic groups, including indigenous people, more than 50% of those persons, if you want to be, and not be conservative, but be very loose with your interpretation, more than 50% of those people are of African descent and can trace their ancestry back to Africa. And let's be also clear of some other historical facts. Slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888 or so, around the 1880s. So it was 50 years after slavery was abolished in the British Empire. So there are people who have a lot of stronger connection with Africa. In fact, what you find in Brazil is that there are people who know their families in West Africa, who are perhaps of Yoruba extraction, or even Angolan extraction from Angola and those parts where slaves were extracted from. And they know their families, and there's actually a connection because 1888 to 2025 is not a long time, but people still have those connections with their African families and African communities in different parts of Africa. So that is a reality. And as one would perhaps, if one hasn't learned the history extensively, it was called the triangle route of trade. So slaves from Africa were taken to South America and the Caribbean. Goods were then loaded on those ships and taken to Europe. Those goods were then processed in Europe and then sold back as trade to African leaders and African communities or African slave traders on the continent. And then the cycle continued. So that up until the early 1800s, or perhaps even later, if one perhaps looks even more deeper. But certainly the slave trade was abolished in 1806, I believe, between 1804 and 1806. So that was the triangle route of trade established. Now, when you look at Bermuda, Bermuda is not quite on that triangle route because, as you described, most of the slaves did not go to North America. And most slaves, the slave trade route would have taken slaves from perhaps West Africa to the markets of Charleston, South Carolina, which is where the major slave trade hub was in North America. That's where most of the slaves came in and were sold and then dispersed out in the southern United States and in the United States during that trade. So Bermuda wasn't on that route. So there weren't huge slave ships stopping in Bermuda and offloading slaves because we were not on that route. We didn't have that large of a market where they would offload. So slaves weren't being deposited here on that trade. The slaves that would eventually be brought to Bermuda, starting obviously around 1620 or so, came out of the Caribbean. They were shipped out of the Caribbean, and I'm sure you're going to touch more on that process and how that process started. But that's where they came from. The majority of African people of descent here in Bermuda came out of the Caribbean. Some did come from Africa on the few occasions that perhaps slaves from Africa were directly procured and brought to Bermuda, but that was not a common thing in the Bermuda colonial experience.
All right, so thank you for that. We'll go to another slide. Today's show and tell. You mind reading that for me, sir?
Yes. Enslaved Africans in the English colony of the Bahamas. In the mid-1600s, Puritans from Bermuda seeking religious freedom immigrated to the Bahamas and brought with them African slaves. Soon after the migration of the Puritans, Bermudian authorities banished to the Bahamas their less desirable whites, free persons of color, and rebellious slaves.
So a little bit about this picture. In the Bahamas, in Nassau, there's a street called Bay Street. And on Bay Street, there's a museum called Pompey House. Pompey House is basically the museum of the Bahamas, National Museum of the Bahamas. So on a trip that I was there, I took a day and visited this museum. And never been there before, never seen pictures of there before. And as I'm walking around, I saw a word that caught my eye, which was Bermuda, right? And so I took this picture. So no, it's not AI, it's an actual picture of in a museum in the Bahamas. So what is essentially saying is that, as you said by the date, that Bermudians seeking religious freedom or whatever. They wanted religious freedom, but they had slaves, but that's another topic. They were the first settlers of the Bahamas after Columbus. Post Columbus, they were the first settlers. So what a lot of people don't know is that in a island called Eleuthera is where the first whites and blacks came to the Bahamas. So if you go to Eleuthera, I'll bring up a map of the Bahamas. If you go to Eleuthera, uh, then this is the Bahamas, right? Eleuthera is to where the word Bahamas is. You would see just under there, you see our name Eleuthera. So if you go to Eleuthera, most of the people there speak like Bermudians. Maybe a slightly different accent, but they have a distinct Bermudian accent. That didn't happen by chance. They didn't just randomly pick what type of accent they want. That happened because both blacks and whites in Eleuthera and other islands originally came from Bermuda. Yeah, over to you, Deputy.
Yeah, thank you for that little point about the Bahamas. And for those Bermudians who don't know, there is a extremely close connection between Bermuda and the Bahamas. And as you described, the Eleutheran adventurers, as they were called, landed on the island of Eleuthera. And they are the persons who established the first English settlement of the island of the Bahamas. That was around 1647. It was led by a gentleman named William Sale, who had served as governor of Bermuda. And he led the expedition of who were then Bermuda settlers or even born Bermudians and their African slaves to the island, pursuing what they felt was their freedom. At the time, this was a time of great political turmoil in what was England. There was the dispute between the Puritans and the Royalists, and Bermuda being a British colony, clearly its leadership was loyal to the crown, and there was a dispute between those who lived here between who were supporting the Royalists and who were supporting the Puritans, who were led by the one Oliver Cromwell. Just a bit of English history for you. But it was those persons left Bermuda to continue to live the life that they wished and found themselves in Eleuthera. And of course, people will know that there's a road called Sale Road in Smith's Parish that's named after William Sale. And so a little more about Eleuthera and its Bermuda connection. Having, like yourself, traveled to the Bahamas, I had the opportunity to go to Eleuthera and also to a place called, there's a small community in Eleuthera that is fairly isolated. It's a small town, township or area of the Bahamas on Eleuthera. And if you yourself come into contact with those persons and hear them speak, and you were to close your eyes, you will believe you're talking to a Bermudian. And this is something that I'm not telling you out of a secondhand. I've seen it on, documentaries and on television, but I experienced it for myself. And when you close your eyes, you hear Bermudians talking. You can hear the Bermudian inflections and pronunciations and dialect in how they speak. And it's actually amazing. Now, understand, this is a community that hasn't been connected directly with Bermuda now for centuries, but still in how they speak, they sound like us. And it was such an amazing experience to have, to actually know that that is the depth of the connection that people in the Bahamas have with Bermuda. And of course, if you go through any Bahamian phone book, you see the names, those interesting, unique Bermuda names that we all know here very well. And you see them pop up in the Bahamian phone book. So there is such a strong connection between these islands that we live in, Bermuda and the Bahamas, that go back to the very beginning of settlement of both those islands.
All right, so now we're going to move on to another set of islands. Turks and Caicos Island. Tell us about this.
Well, Turks and Caicos is interesting because if you were to look at them, you would probably think that they're a part of the Bahamas, and they as well are very intricately connected to the Bahamas as well. But this is a group of islands that have another very strong connection with our island of Bermuda. Turks and Caicos was actually settled by Bermudians. And it was settled for a particular reason, not so much because of the same rationale that the Lutheran adventurers took, but it was settled for the sake of trade and economics. There was established in Turks a salt trade. As one would know, in the colonial times and pre-colonial times, salt was an extremely valuable commodity. It was currency. It was just like oil is today globally as a commodity. And so salt was king. Salt was cash. Salt meant wealth. So Bermudians, in their industriousness and their great maritime ability, sailed to Turks and Caicos to establish and rake and procure salt from those islands and use it as trade as a part of the Bermudian trade that it was doing with the Americas and with other parts of the world. And of course, the salt was used to cure and preserve food. And as I told you, it was used for other things as well, particularly, and it was a currency. It was literally cash. So Bermudians got very good at this, and over time established permanent settlements in the Turks and Caicos. So, and Bermudians were sailing from Bermuda, in large gigs and on Bermuda sloops between the Turks and Caicos, particularly in the area of Grand Turk, where you'll find salt ponds still existing, although they are not being commercially operated at this time. That stopped many, many years ago. But there's still the remnants of those salt ponds in Grand Turk. And thus, because of the Bermudian activity and connection, essentially Turks and Caicos became almost an extension of Bermuda, a Bermuda colony, if you want to call it that, for many years. And again, Bermudian merchants, Bermudian residents, Bermudian slaves permanently established themselves in the Turks and Caicos. And with that permanence came the building of structures. Bermuda stone, our limestone, which was not very prolific in the Turks at the time, was shipped as ballast on Bermuda sloops down to Turks and used to build buildings, because ballast was used to keep the boats, low in the water so they could move very quickly. And then when they offloaded their cargo, they would offload the ballast, and the ballast was used to build structures. And you see in the picture there a very prominent structure, which I believe is in Grand Turk, that is built in the Bermuda style, Bermuda colonial style. This structure still stands today. It is a part of the unique architectural heritage of Turks, and Again, it's a perfect example of that Bermuda connection. The names of people in the in the Turks and Caicos are Bermuda names. I can tell you from my own experience, and you would have this experiences too, Chris, that the people of Turks and Caicos acknowledge their connection with Bermuda. And in fact, a number of people that I came into contact with, when you let them know they're from Bermuda, they tell you, oh yeah, I have family there. And they'll tell you. And this is not family that they necessarily have seen recently, but they know that they and their families are connected with the Turks and Caicos. In fact, one example is the wife of the current prime minister of Turks. His name is Washington Mizik, and one would know that name. Some Bermudans may not know, but the name Mizik is a Bermuda name. It originates in Bermuda. So even with his name, he has a connection, and he knows Bermuda very well and has been here and has even worked with people here over many, many years. But his wife, Mrs. Mizik, herself knows her Bermuda connection and knows herself to be connected to Bermuda families, particularly the Simmons family, who would be very prominent, as we know, in the Sands area. And when you look at Mrs. Mizik, she looks like a Bermudian. And I don't know if you had a picture of the premier and his wife in your slide deck, Chris, but you know and I know that she looks like she's from Bermuda. If she came and walked to Bermuda, people would think that she's from here. So that is, again, the strong connection in names, in culture, in food, in mannerisms that the Turks and Caicos has with Bermuda.
Yeah, that's the thing. Again, and this is a story, right? A few years ago, they have this thing called flying while black, right? Which means you're liable to get pulled aside. A few years ago, maybe about 20, 25 years ago, I was flying through Miami, came from Jamaica, flying through Miami to come back to Bermuda. And flying while black, I got pulled into a room. In the room, there were like 7 other persons. Of the 7 persons, 6 were black. So you could do the maths. Anyway, so one particular person was talking, and I looked over and I'm like, this guy's from Bermuda too, right? And I was seeing him before, but I was like, hey, this guy's from Bermuda. So I was like, yo, what, bro? You're from Bermuda? And he was like, no, I'm not from Bermuda. And I said, I'm looking at him. I said, your parents are from Bermuda? No, my parents are not from Bermuda. I'm like, you used to go to school in Bermuda? So I'm thinking maybe he thought I was a police, so he was trying to be kind of being evasive, right? And I said, well, I don't know. So I'm saying, yeah, you could try to fool somebody else, but you're Bermudian. And he says, no, I'm from Turks and Caicos. And then he explained to me the connection, or part of the connection of Turks and Caicos to Bermuda. And I was like totally shocked. So this was before the internet. So before you could Google everything, right? So I said that in a sense to say, here you have 2 persons of color, both pulled over by the U.S. Customs, both sound the same, but from 2 completely different island groups. It could only happen one way, right? Because there's got to be connectivity somewhere along the line. And as you said, when you go to Turks and Caicos, especially the older Turks and Caicos Islanders, they have the same surnames as us: Butterfields, the Aswoods, the Friths, you name it, the Durhams. The as you said, the premier is a Mizik, right? The first woman elected in Bermuda was Miss Morrow Mizik, right? That's where the name comes from. So that's a slave name. Well, all our names are slave names. But the point I'm getting at is that his mother's family is the Durhams, right? Or come from the Durham tribe. 90% of the MPs in Turks and Caicos, the family comes from Bermuda. we had a delegation of union representatives came from the Caribbean. One was named Turks and Caicos. One was named Tolbert, right? The other one was named Swan. You can't get any more Bermudian names than that, right?
Nope.
They probably got more Bermudian names than you and I.
Nope. Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, but and at one point, our national hero, Mary Prince,
Yes,
she was taken the first time she was taken from Bermuda. I think, well, she left her Bermuda, was taken from Bermuda by the Darrow family and taken to Turks and Caicos Island, right?
Yep.
I have a picture of her, or the place where she supposedly lived. But
Yep.
she was taken from Bermuda to Turks and Caicos Island to rake the salt. Her mother and her sister were taken under to rake the salt. So that shows the historical tie-in of Bermuda to the Turks and Caicos Island. And as you said, they acknowledge, they are taught their history more than we're taught our history. Well, we weren't taught that. Hey, you got a lot of cousins down in Turks and Caicos Island, right? They were taught that they originated from Bermuda. They acknowledged that, right?
Yep. And also, as you're talking, perhaps some people, again, and I just want to reiterate this, would think that we're just talking about the people of African descent. No, we're not. This connection between, particularly, we're just focusing on two island groups right now, the Bahamas, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and the overseas territory of Turks and Caicos, would think that we're just talking about people of African descent. We're not. This is about people. This connection spans the strata of Bermuda society, to those who would connected with and I'm just using this sort of identifying these, not to put people on a higher or lower position, but those early European settlers who were a part of the original Bermuda settlement. Those families and those persons who would be very prominent in trade, in privateering, and any sort of maritime activity, those Europeans who owned ships, who owned sloops, who were carrying on business as part of the representatives of the then Bermuda Company and by other groups, those Europeans had extensive trade and commercial connections with the Caribbean. Their families sometimes moved parts of their family to the Caribbean to establish business houses that were connected with Bermuda, that were connected with other islands, and would have offices or establishments throughout the islands of the Caribbean to facilitate trade and activity between Bermuda and those Caribbean islands, particularly with Turks and particularly with the Bahamas. And that went on for at least two centuries or so, particularly during the period that prior to the American Revolution. That there was an ongoing activity between Bermuda and the Bahamas and the Turks and others that was firmly established, that was a part of the ongoing activity between our populations. And in some cases, people would just see their family in Bahamas and in Turks as just being a extension of what was a Bermuda family.
Yeah, so you asked earlier, bring up something for you. You asked earlier for something, so I want to just...
There you go.
That's Premier Missick and his wife, Miss.
Yes.
Yeah, as you say, her maiden name is Simmons.
Simmons, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
So any Bermudian looking at that picture, when you look at her, you probably would identify her with somebody on our island. Because when I saw her, I saw a Bermudian woman. And as I said, when you speak to Mrs. Missick, she speaks very normally, naturally, with pride. And if she hasn't been to Bermuda and she wants to come to Bermuda, of her connections with Bermuda. She speaks of it like she knows it, as a part of her very soul.
Mhm.
And so that's the strength of the connection. And Premier Mizik, prior to getting into active politics, was involved with business. He's a trained barrister, was doing business with Bermudians, many Bermudian business persons. So he's had a long relationship with Bermuda going back to the 70s and 80s.
Right.
So that is the extent and depth of that connection with our island.
And here's the irony, right? I'm gonna find a clip later on and play it. But if you listen to Premier Mizik, his accent is very Bermudian, and he sounds awfully a lot like the former Minister of Finance, Bob Richards, right? So here's the tie-in. Honorable Bob Richards' mother was a Lightborn, if I'm not mistaken, or related to the Lightborns. And we know one of the prominent feminists that were in Bermuda and were in Turks and Caicos was the Lightborn family. So
Yes.
you could do the maps, right?
Yeah. Right. And that's both sides that's the African Lightborns and the European Lightborns have a strong connection, historical connection with the Turks, as does the Aswood family, the European Aswoods in Bermuda, and the African Aswoods in Bermuda. Those families in particular, and the Aswood family will tell you, the older Black members who I used to meet years ago of the Aswood family would tell you, we are connected with the Turks and Caicos. Saunders is another name that's common in Bermuda, which is also connected with the Turks and Caicos. But like particularly the Aswood family, they acknowledge their connections with the Turks and Caicos.
Yeah. Matter of fact, the opposition leader in Turks and Caicos Island is Edwin Aswood.
Well, there you go.
Let's go to something else. You mind reading this? I don't know, the first paragraph or so. Well, is anyone first two sentences?
Sure. Bermuda limestone as ballast. Bermuda limestone was used as ballast in ships, particularly in the hulls of the Deliverance and the Patience, the two ships reconstructed on Bermuda by the survivors of the Sea Venture shipwreck. The use of limestone as ballast is significant as it helps to lower the center of gravity and provide stability to the boats and ships.
All right. So that's not Chris Famous's words. Could you read this one for me?
Yes. With limestone on board, Spirit will visit history. When the Spirit of Bermuda sloop set sail for the Dominican Republic this weekend, it will also make a pilgrimage stopover in the Turks and Caicos Islands, said Malcolm Kirkland of the Bermuda Sloop Foundation. The vessel is to carry Bermuda limestone quarry block on board as ballast, stopping at Grand Turk Island and Salt Key to connect its crew with Bermuda's former salt-producing maritime staging post. Plans include a limited overs cricket match against the island's secondary school. Mr. Kirkland said, Spirit will ceremonially carry Bermuda limestone quarry block for delivery to both islands. Limestone was traditionally used as ballast on the way down and then used for construction in the Turks Islands and other ports where needed in the Anglo-Atlantic world. Spirit crew will also rake salt and visit the house of 18th century Bermudian and former slave and abolitionist Mary Prince's house. The Spirit heads out this Sunday on a service mission to the Dominican Republic, returning home June 25th. There will be nearly 40 crew and chaperones aboard, Mr. Kirkland said. The Skiller voyage, will make real teams out of diverse Bermudians on a real and challenging mission to parts of the world well known to ancestral Bermudians.
All right. So, for those who don't know, that is Bermuda's Royal Gazette, which is considered the gold standard of journalism in Bermuda. So, here the point I'm getting at is that don't take Chris's words, don't take Walter's words, because we're politicians, we could be lying. The Royal Gazette, through the Bermuda Sloop Foundation, clearly stated that they use Bermuda limestone to take down to Turks and Caicos, and that was used to build the houses in Turks and Caicos Island. Also, it spoke about Mary Prince's the house where Mary Prince lived, right? So again, it's not our opinion. This is the facts that how intricately we are related to the Turks and Caicos Island. I also want to show another picture. This is of a wall. I know it sounds silly, but where do you think this wall is? Where would anyone just looking at it, where would they think this wall is?
I think it's somewhere in Bermuda, some roadside wall.
All right. So this wall is actually located in Oranjestad, which is the capital of Sint Eustatius, which is a small Dutch island next in between St. Kitts and St. Martin, next to Saba. That's another episode. But the point I'm getting at is that one day I was driving along Sint Eustatius, and I'm like looking at this wall, and I'm like, why does this wall look familiar? Like, and I just stopped, took a picture, and I saw a historian there, and he was like, we got a wall made out of Bermuda stone, right? I'm like, oh, well, you can imagine what I said. But so this wall, this stone is hundreds of years, old stone is hundreds of years old, millions actually. But this wall is made out of stone taken from Bermuda hundreds of years ago. You can see there's different shapes. There's some that flat, like a very flat, some that are very block-like, and some are interspersed. But the point is to say that stone only reached to Sint Eustatius via ship, didn't go via FedEx, didn't go via air cargo, hundreds of years ago, when the ships went down there to take stone and other things and bring back, what they brought back in human cargo, right? There are a number of Bermudians who have family from St. Kitts and Sint Eustatius. That's a whole nother episode. But for the point of Sint Eustatius, the Wilson family, the Heiliger family, the Thompson family, some of the Thompsons, some of the Hassels. So those are all Bermudian names, but they originated in these Dutch islands of Sint Eustatius and Saba. The Johnson family, the Graff family, everybody go get beef pie, birdies, they came from Sint Eustatius. So that's, again, just showing another historical connection between Bermuda and Sint Eustatius and the Caribbean on the whole, right?
Yes. And for those, I know you don't have the map up right now, Chris, but Sint Eustatius is very far. We've been speaking just about Bahamas and Turks, but Sint Eustatius is in the other side of the Caribbean. Those islands exist in the western side of the Caribbean, those two we've been talking about. Sint Eustatius is in the eastern side of the Caribbean, so far from what we've been talking about. But people should appreciate, why would there be Bermuda stone in Sint Eustatius? Well, that speaks to the extent of the Bermuda maritime trade and activity in the Caribbean itself during that time, during the maritime period, from the 1600s to the 1800s. That is how extensive it was. And let's also be sort of clear about another fact about it, that Yes, so there were extensive commercial relationships between Bermudian mariners and trade centers throughout the Caribbean region. One. Two, the majority of the crews on those ships weren't, Europeans. They were actually Africans, Bermudians. The majority of the male Bermudian population during the maritime period were on the ships. They weren't even here a lot of the time because they were on the water, trading, actively participating in the maritime activity throughout the Atlantic region. And you can talk about the Caribbean, but that extended all the way down to the Caribbean, right up to Nova Scotia and to the Canadian Maritimes, right down the North American coast, all the way down. And so the majority of Bermudian men, that's what they were doing. They were working on those ships, while here, most of the domestic activity was being carried out by our African Bermudian women. They brought up the children, they grew the food, they maintained the household. And maybe speaks to some of the culture that we all in Bermuda exist in today, where women are the preeminent, in many cases, the preeminent members of the household in Bermudian families. That's because that's historic, in that they were the ones cultivating agriculture. They were the ones maintaining their homes and obviously also working for their slave masters, but also bringing up their families and overall running society. As the men, most of the men during that period were on the water.
Yeah, so here's a map showing where St. Eustatius is, right?
Yep.
It's
Just so
spelled
people can see.
SINT because that's the Dutch spelling for it. It's not an English island.
Yeah.
But
that is the extent of the Bermuda trading network, the Bermuda trading activity, the Bermuda maritime activity. And again, Black Bermudians in particular, African Bermudians, were essential piece and part of that actual activity. And let me also state another point as well. One would say, well, most of those ships were captained by Europeans. Well, a lot of them were, but there were also African captains. There were also Black Bermudian captains, Black Bermudian first mates, because of the extensive experience that Black Bermudians had in the maritime space. They operated those ships on behalf of their owners. So it wasn't just Europeans operating those ships.
All right. Well, that's the story of most things, is that the Europeans are the owners and the people of color are the workers, right?
Yeah.
So one other thing as we start to close up in the last 10 minutes or so, 5 minutes. Tell us about this.
Well, that is the famous Bermuda Gosling's rum that has been a fixture of Bermuda life for centuries. The Gosling rum was, I believe, established in the early 1800s by the Gosling family and is a product that has been, connected with the Bermuda image. It's, the chief ingredient in the Dark and Stormy, which is a Bermuda originated drink. You may hear about it around the world, but guess what? And they may even use other rums, but the original Dark and Stormy and also another drink called the Yellowbird are Bermuda originated drinks. Now, what's the story of this particular interesting elixir, if I can call it that? Well, its basic ingredient comes from sugar. And as we know, sugar was a crop that was grown in the colonial period of the Caribbean and contributed to the Caribbean being one of the wealthiest regions in the world when it came to wealth, because sugar, like salt, was a very prized commodity, and whether it be in Hispaniola, Haiti and Dominican Republic, Barbados, Jamaica, and other islands, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and others in the Eastern Caribbean, other slave societies, Trinidad, if you want to go that far, were all places where sugar was cultivated. So a byproduct of the cultivation of sugar and the processing of it is a thing called molasses. This dark product. So it's that molasses which is used as a basis for many rums. Some rums are dark, some rums are light. This is a dark rum. So the molasses that came from the production of sugar in the Caribbean would have been bought by the Gosling family and used to make this very famous Bermuda rum. So the Gosling family, as a merchant family that's been in Bermuda since the 1600s and early until like 1700s, and still exists today, as we all know, and sells their rum not only in Bermuda but sells it around the world. The basis of their building their own merchant and wealth success as a family was in trading with the Caribbean originally. So that the basic element of that rum came from Caribbean plantations that were worked by African slaves, picked up by Bermuda ships that were the crew were a Black Bermudian crew, brought to Bermuda and processed and traded by the Gosling family. So that rum is a symbol of the very Caribbean connective experience that Bermuda is a part of.
You're right. So as many of the detractors like to say, oh,
yeah, sorry. A lot of the detractors like to always say Bermuda wasn't a plantation. We didn't have bad slavery here. We had good slavery, right? So again, the question is, so where did that sugar cane come from? Where did that molasses come from? It didn't come from England. It didn't come from America.
And it wasn't grown here.
It didn't come from Amazon. It came from the Caribbean, right? Back to the Gosling's rum. The same historian, Walter Roban in Sint Eustatius, when I took him a bottle of rum, and he saw the word Goslings, and he's like, you know, this name is a Dutch name, and some of these people originated from Sint Eustatius, right? I said no, and they said he showed me a coin. It was called a Gosling coin, right? And he was like, the original Dutch name was Gosling, but as people moved to English islands, they changed the name to a more English sounding name. So I'm not saying that these Goslings came from there, but some Goslings came from Sint Eustatius or via the Dutch Caribbean for sure. So the next time you have a dark and stormy, right? Not you, because you don't drink. But the next time comedians have a dark and stormy, just remember it started with the Caribbean. So as we start to wrap up, Honorable Roban, I want to thank you for this first, as they say in cricket, the opening bat of Bermuda's connections with the Caribbean. We have a lot more to talk about islands such as Jamaica, Barbados, St. Kitts, St. Vincent. Almost every island we have historic connections with. But it was important to establish that Bermudian, the African persons of African descent, we originally came from the Caribbean. We didn't come directly from Africa. And almost as importantly, it was the Black and white Bermudians that originally populated the islands of Bahamas and Turks and Caicos Island. This is undeniable. Like, so people could say whatever they want, but the facts are the facts, right? So we'll have you back as your busy schedule allows. And before we go, I just want to play something so we can just educate ourselves, because one of the problems with people is they're not educated.
Presenting the leaders of the British Overseas Territories, the Honourable Cora Richardson Hodge, Premier of Anguilla. The Honourable David Burt, J.P. M.P., Premier of Bermuda. The Honourable Andre Ebanks, Premier of the Cayman Islands. Like and subscribe to our channel. Leaders of British Overseas Territories. Honorable Natalio Wheatley, Virgin Islands. Honorable Reuben Meade, Montserrat. Honorable Washington Missick, Turks and Caicos Islands.
Yeah, we'll get into that another time, but it's always good to show how connected we are. So again, I thank you and look forward to part 2 when we discuss Bermuda's connections with other islands. Thank you once
very
again.
much for having me.
And once again, a shout out to my co-host, Shana Smith Archer of the beautiful Virgin Islands, Speaker Shirley Osborne of Montserrat. I want to shout out to Billy in the Cayman Islands, who gave me the concept to pursue this task, right? I also have someone chimed in, with the Tottenham Forest supporter. Deal family, popular name in Turks and Caicos. Okay, yes. All right, Mr. Deal. And again, a shout out to our media partners, Cayman Mall Road in Cayman Islands, CBN Radio in the Virgin Islands, Channel 82 in Bermuda. Thank you, Lemon. And also Radio Turks and Caicos Island in Turks and Caicos Island. And with that, folks, I'll see you later on. We have another guest at 1 p.m. Thank you, Honorable.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Any final words?
No, happy to be here to talk about the Bermuda experience and how we are all connected in this world, African, European, non-European peoples. In many ways, we are one human race, and I look forward to discussing the Bermuda experience and the Bermuda connections we have with this wonderful Atlantic region and Caribbean region.
Thank you.